بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and peace be upon you all. Welcome. Thank you for bringing your heart. So today I have the topic of lower self-values versus higher self-values. So as I previously talked about, when it comes to developing inner fortitude, it's about rooting yourself in values that you want to be your grounding and your foundation. This is of course in addition to our Aqidah, in addition to all the values that Islam teaches us. But I think that sometimes if you don't actually identify what your values are and how you want to live your life, you can get lost into centering yourself around nafs-centered values, lower self-values. So this is from my Heart Over Mind and Ego method. This is actually, you can read more about this topic in my book. This is in the end of, it's in part 2, so it's in the practice section. But today I'm going to focus in on just some key lower self-values and what higher self-values we can replace those lower self-values with, okay? And the reason, first of all, the reason why I want to go over this, because I think that there's a lot of misconception when it comes to developing inner strength, and there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to our journey in this world and how we should walk our path in this world. And one of the biggest ones that I found when it comes to developing mental and emotional and spiritual strength is that many people think that it's about perfection. And you might, when I say this, you might say, no, it's not, right? Obviously. But the way you might be living your life might be centered around that perfectionism attitude. So one of the things I try to stress is that it is not about perfection, and there's actually harms to having a perfectionist approach in life. And that's why, and many people don't realize that actually perfectionism is a lower self-value. It is centered around the nafs. It is centered around you feeling good. And the reason is because excellence is different than perfectionism. We have the concept of excellence in our faith. We have the concept of doing things with excellence, of striving for excellence, ihsan, in worship, right? But perfection is an attribute of only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not of us. And a lot of people try to adopt that false belief that they can be perfect. But really what it is, and why I identify it in my home method as a lower self-value, is because perfectionism is an attempt for the nafs to feel good. It's an attempt for your lower self to avoid feeling discomfort. So each of us have our own psychology, right? And we each have formed this ideal image of who we should be in order to feel no shame ever. And I'm talking about toxic shame here. I'm not talking about shame in terms of the humility that you have in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you sin or when you make a mistake, that normal human humility that we all should have, right? I'm not talking about that kind of shame that is actually helpful. Not all shame is bad. I'm talking about toxic shame, the kind of shame that is debilitating, that makes a person feel empty inside, the kind of shame that makes a person feel worthless, that they themselves feel like they are not valuable, that they are flawed, basically eternally flawed. That kind of shame is toxic, and it's not helpful, and it's crippling, and it keeps people from growing. It keeps people from actually, having that healthy sense of balance in life. And so each person has their own psychology, your own makeup. Throughout your life, you formed this image of the person, that perfect person you think you need to be in order to be worthy, in order to be lovable, in order to be good enough, right? And so each of you has a different image. For one of you, it might be, the perfect me is the person who does this and this and this every day. And once one thing falls off and you don't fit in that routine, for example, you abandon it all. Why? Because that toxic shame comes up. You don't feel like you're good enough anymore. You don't feel like you're worthy anymore. So perfectionism is an attempt of the nafs to make you avoid feeling that feeling, basically, that toxic shame, where you're not good enough. Because the nafs likes to preserve its image. As long as the nafs is you're doing things that aligns with that perfect image where the nafs can get its sense of worth, and you could get that sense of like, oh, I'm good now, which by the way can lead to a little bit of superiority when you don't realize it, when you're a perfectionist. Because you think you have to be this in order to be lovable and worthy. So what does that mean when you're not? When you don't fit that rigid expectation of what lovable and worthy and a good person and good enough is, right? And that's why as Muslims, our job is to align ourselves with what Allah deems to be valuable, not what even I deem to be valuable. Meaning that I want to be attached to what Allah thinks is good enough. Not what I think is good enough. What Allah thinks is valuable for me to do, for example, in a day. What Allah thinks for me is what is a good deed in front of Allah? What are the most beloved deeds in front of Allah? Like if you think about it, a lot of times we fixate on our own image of perfection rather than Allah's expectations of perfection or excellence, right? So perfectionism can be a tricky cycle that people get into because it looks on the outward like strength. It looks like, wow, this person is on top of their game. This person is doing, look, they got it, they have it all together. And that's really what the nafs always wants to present. I want to present like I have it all together. I want to present like I'm always perfect. I want to present that I'm always strong. This perfectionism, why it's a lower self attribute or value, and it's because it's centered around you preserving your image. And the consequence of that is when you are busy preserving your image, when you are busy monitoring your image rather than allowing yourself to face your truths and to recognize where you're at and to be balanced with yourself and to have this truthfulness, this sidq with yourself, is that it actually prevents you from growing. It prevents you from getting the help you need. For example, a lot of times what prevents people from coming to therapy and getting into treatment for their trauma is they pride themselves on being strong throughout their whole life without it. It's almost like a weakness for them to come to treatment. I don't need it. I've heard people say, look at me, I'm doing fine, I'm strong, I've been strong all these years, I don't need it. So their image of themselves as doing it all and managing their trauma on their own and being strong, right, strong, is actually the very wall that keeps them from getting out of that survival mode and doing the work of healing. Because survival mode and you living from that place constantly is not really strength. It's you trying to survive, it's you always being on guard. And perfectionism is very much related to being on guard, your guardedness. Because you're always trying to maintain this image that you're okay, you're good, you're perfect, that it really makes you build this wall around you, this guardedness, that keeps you from being who you are, number one. From being vulnerable, from getting the help you need, from being truthful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So lower self-values keep you from Allah. Lower self-values, nafs-centered values, keep you from growth, from having a fulfilling relationship with your Creator, from being truthful with Him actually, and having fulfilling du'as, because you can't really engage in fulfilling du'as that nourish your heart if you are not truthful. If you are so busy exerting so much energy to maintain a perfect image that you're not really allowing yourself to see the reality of what's going on. So perfectionism is not something we want to hold on to because it doesn't exist, it's an illusion, but it also just coddles our nafs further and really creates a lot of imbalance within us where you don't know how to function when life doesn't match that perfect idea, when your day doesn't match that perfect idea, when you yourself don't match that perfect idea. For a perfectionist, someone who's chronically in that perfectionist mode, something small could really trigger their shame and could really get them off track to doing something that they were supposed to do. And you see this all the time, for example, you feel like this happens sometimes to people where they're see, everyone's perfectionism is in different areas. Some people, I've worked with people who their perfectionism is how they look. If like they're going somewhere and they don't feel like they look okay, something slight is off, it can make them go home. No, I can't go to this thing and benefit and enjoy people's company. Look at all the things that they stop themselves from going to do just because one thing was off in their image. Is that healthy? No. Is that heart-centered or nafs-centered? Is that higher self-value or lower self-value? It's a lower self-value. You're functioning from a lower place. That's really what it's about. You're functioning from a lower place. When you function from a higher place, you transcend, you go beyond that small flaw. And you keep walking towards your destination regardless, meaning that you see beyond this flaw. Which essentially is you see beyond yourself. You see beyond this image that you have created for yourself, that you think is what's lovable and what's worthy and what's valuable, right? Like you're essentially going out of a place of self-worship, self-centeredness. You see how it's so easy to mask really harmful values and habits with something that appears outwardly beautiful? Like perfectionism, a lot of people pride themselves. Outwardly, it looks like strength. But inwardly, it could be self-centeredness. You obsessed about your self-image, self-worship, right? You can't go beyond the self. And that's what shaitan wants. He wants you doing tawaf around yourself. That's what shaitan wants. This is why we have this concept of tawaf, right? When we go to Umrah, when we go to Hajj, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that we center only around Him. We center around Him, the universe centers around Him. Everything is in that motion. And shaitan, and this is the agenda of our time, the toxic movements of our time, is to get people to do tawaf around themselves. Where everything is in motion around me. Even like my flaws. My flaw dictates now what I go to, what happens, what I do, my actions. You see, it's not always like good things. Because someone might be listening and might say, no, I don't center myself around the good things that I have. You could be centering yourself around your flaws. You could be viewing your flaws as a destination. Your flaws could be the things that are controlling you. Your perfectionism is what's keeping you stuck and not allowing you to actually enjoy fulfilling relationships with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with yourself and with others. So be careful of how shaitan packages harmful things in destructive ways. And he packages harmful things with beautiful packaging. Yeah, I want that. I want this ideal image. But who created that image in your mind? How did this image of a perfect you get formed in your mind? First of all, is it rooted in who God wants you to be? Is it rooted in the Quran and Sunnah? Where did you develop this rigid idea of who you think you need to be in order to be perfect, good enough, lovable, or worthy? And everyone has that ideal image. And sometimes the most freeing moments in our life are moments where you can take an attribute that you think you always needed to have, or something that you wanted to have, because you think it matches that image of what a perfect image or perfect ideal self is. And you detach yourself from it. That's not really important in the bigger scheme of things. That's not really important to Allah. Allah never made this mandatory for me. It's so freeing, because in those moments what you're doing is now I'm aligning my image with Allah's image. I'm surrendering my image of what I think is perfect to submit to Allah's image of what He thinks is good for me. I mean, we do this as when we as Muslim women wear hijab. We do this. That's why it's always strange when, they say it's oppressive. How is it oppressive when we literally have to go against what society wants and the image that society has created for us to align with what God wants for us. It's like, it's contradictory, right? It's what they say. But so essentially, and that's why it's a higher self-value to go beyond your perfectionism and these rigid ideas of who you think you should be, to surrender and to submit to who Allah wants you to be. It's a higher self-value because you have to elevate yourself. It's a higher self-value because you have to be uncomfortable, and the nafs hates when you're uncomfortable. Yeah, you can stay in this lower self vibration. You can, but you're gonna always get stuck. You're never gonna allow yourself to reach your potential. It's very hard to relinquish a perfectionist cycle, because you have to risk being perceived in a way that you don't like, number one. You have to also face your own perception of yourself. When you allow yourself to step out of these like rigid attributes that you always feel like you have to stick to. And so many people are stuck in that mode of constantly monitoring other people's impression of them. And you could ask yourself, as I'm saying this, if you do this, because a lot of people do this, where basically it's very hard for them to allow themselves to even just be without always over-explaining, packaging things nicely. Because you're afraid. It's like we have this issue in our community. I really feel like in our Muslim community spaces, so many people are programmed to think that their experience of negative emotion or pain is directly correlated with low iman, low faith. And you see this. People have a hard time with just saying, yeah, I'm having a difficult day. I'm sad today. Without all the over explaining of, no, but alhamdulillah, and I'm not saying not to say alhamdulillah, but I'm talking about, there's a difference between, and I know this from my work, there's a difference between someone who just, because that's what they're saying, they're saying alhamdulillah because they're truly grateful, and there's a difference between that and you feeling like now you need to like go and preserve your image mode, right? Where it's like, but alhamdulillah, and people do this, and I work with a lot of Muslims, in my experience and even currently, where I have to like present that to them so they can see that they actually spend a significant amount of time trying to monitor my impression of them. So we do that work even in the session, because it allows them, if we can do it there, it allows them to kind of recognize, wow, I did spend the last 5 minutes making sure that you don't think that right? It's like that whole thing, I want to make sure you don't think that I have low iman. We do this, right? People do this. And a lot of it has to do with the stigma of mental health and navigating emotional issues. And many people till today view that negative emotions or difficult times is correlated with, I must be doing something wrong spiritually. And so you almost are spending a lot of your energy over explaining to people that you're okay. And instead of actually using that same energy to accept what you're going through and to allow yourself to be human, to hold space. And I'm not talking, everything is within balance. I'm not talking about constantly being in complaining mode. I'm not talking about constantly being in venting mode. I'm talking about holding a balanced space for yourself to be able to experience the human experience as it is, right? To be able to go through your human experience through all its diverse things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us with. So I always say it wouldn't be called a test if you felt good. It wouldn't be called a test if you weren't agitated. It wouldn't be called a test if you function the same way all the time. Like sometimes people will say like, oh, I can't do this right now because I'm struggling. I don't know why I can't function the same way. I'm like, well, it wouldn't be called a test if you were able to function in the same exact way as you did before the test, right? The test is there, and it does affect your ability to function or show up in the same capacity. That's what makes it a test. That's what makes it a struggle. So I hope you're seeing that, like, why it's important to change the way we look at some of these values that are normalized in our society and are viewed as like, wow, strength, and when it really isn't. And it's so easy to think that we're doing something good when it comes from a lower place. It comes from our nafs that just wants to feel good. For you to actually tackle perfectionism and for you to actually tackle this constant monitoring of the impression of others that others have of you, you actually have to tame your nafs. You have to say no to your nafs when it wants to go in that mode of like preserving its image. Well, you have to detach from your need to make sure everyone thinks it's essentially you doing the work of stopping people pleasing, you doing the work of strengthening your identity in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know how empowering it is to let someone who is persistent on having an opinion of you that is not accurate, to let them have an opinion of you that's not accurate. We always think empowerment is if I can over-explain and I can think and I can make sure that I can articulate it well, or no. Actually, strength is you believing in who you are to the point that you don't really have a need as strong to correct every single person who doesn't align with that same belief that you have. That's how you know when you're becoming stronger, by the way. That's how you know when you're becoming emotionally mature. In our society today, we think strength is if you're able to constantly, be able to dish it out, right? No, strength is actually when you are so secure in yourself that you don't always need to dish it out. You don't always need to have a comeback. And I'm not saying not to speak up for yourself, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if you always feel the need to, speak to preserve your image, that's not a sign of strength. That's a sign that you are dependent on what is external for you to feel secure internally. So before I get into these values and the higher self-value that replaces that value, I just want to remind you all that the spiritual journey and this human experience contains all the variations of struggles, all the variations of emotions. It contains worry at times. You can have iman and you can be worried at times. You can have iman and you can struggle with anxiety at times. Why is it that if anxiety or struggles or, if like distress was not a normal part of basically our human experience, why would the Prophet ﷺ give us, teach us du'as to say and supplications to say when we are in times of distress? Why would we have that? If it wasn't supposed to be something that we were going to feel or experience. For example, we have the dua of Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum bi rahmatika astaghith aslih li sha'ni kullu wa la takilni ila nafsi tarfat ayn. And this is the one where the Prophet ﷺ told us to say it in times of distress. We call out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you call him, by his names and you say, oh self-sustaining or all-sustaining, by your mercy I seek your help. Take care of all my affairs, correct all my affairs, rectify them. And do not leave me to myself even for a blink of an eye. The reason the scholars say this dua is so powerful is because you actually, in those moments, you are successful in that moment of saying that dua because you remembered your need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And actually failure in life is when you forget your need for Allah and you think you're the one who is responsible for your own sustaining. And that's why we call upon Him as the one who is self-sufficient, the one who is all-sustaining. He's the one who sustains everything. And you remember that you need Him so much that you don't even want to be left without Him for a blink of an eye. So this dua is so powerful. But how many of us, in times of distress, instead of judging yourself and beating yourself up for being anxious or being upset or being distressed, and then going into that spiral of what does it say about my iman, what does it say about my faith, I'm so weak. How many of you actually take the time? How many people go directly into dua? A lot of people forget that. They forget to go to dua because it's a muscle you have to build, right? It's a muscle you have to build to train yourself. You know how let me think of a good example for this. It's like when you're not feeling well physically, you remember, oh, let me go take an Advil. You have a headache. Usually we do this when it comes to physical issues, right? Oh, let me go, I feel dehydrated. Let me go drink water. Do you sit there and beat yourself up for being dehydrated? Do you sit there and beat yourself up for having a headache? We don't. This is my biggest issue. It's like a pet peeve of mine, right? My professional pet peeve is the way we treat physical issues in comparison to psychological issues. It's because we give importance as a society to what is physical and measurable and seen rather than what is often unseen, right? Not something, your psychological experience is not always measurable. It's not always something that can be physically, outwardly seen right away, right? And this is actually why I developed the HOME method, the heart over mind to ego method, is because, and why I created the model where our entities are part of a psychospiritual system is why, because when I was pre-med first, before I switched to psychology, I was studying anatomy and I loved anatomy, and I saw, wow, the way we understand the physical body is through systems. Did I say symptoms before? I said symptoms? No, I meant systems. So the way we understand our physical anatomy is through the various systems within the body. And I'm like, wow, we give importance to study each system to understand the whole body. And then there are these aspects within us, like our spiritual heart, right? And the psychological capacities we have, our emotions. I can't really tell you which organ, right? Like where in the body is your ego? Someone asked me that one time, right? Your nafs, so part of my approach in the heart over mind ego method is to show that they are part of a system of their own, and which I define as a psychospiritual system, and that they interact with each other, and that they have their own importance, even though they might not be as seen or measurable or tangible, but they affect how we function in the world, and we need to give that importance as well. But imagine I wish we could function or interact with our psychological experience and our spiritual experience the way we interact with our physical experience. You have a physical wound? No problem. Go to the doctor. I don't feel well physically? What treatment approaches are there? Should I go make myself a tea? Should I go take some honey? Should I go to actually book an appointment with a doctor? Should I, right? You try to take preventative measures so that you don't get sick. Same thing, we should have that non-stigmatizing approach when it comes to our psychological health. So how many of us can work on, next time I'm upset, I'm anxious, I'm going to train myself to make dua right away. And I'm going to try my hardest to skip the whole self-judgment. I'm just going to view it as a normal part of my experience, and I'm going to go right into making dua. I'm going to go right into making it the means, not the end. So in that moment, I talked about self-worship before. In that moment, what are you doing now? Who are you centering around? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not yourself, not your flaw, not you. So now even you become the means and not the end. Because you see, we were never designed to be the end. We were never designed to be the Rabb of ourselves, the Lord of ourselves. And actually, any time you attempt to center your life around yourself, or to make yourself the end, or to treat yourself as a destination, whatever it is, your flaws, your good, anything within yourself, you make it the end, you make it the destination, you make it your center point, you're going to struggle. You are not designed to burden that responsibility that only a creator can burden. Only a creator has the capacity to take on. So a lot of people function in that place of trying to be the Lord of themselves. Ibn Ata'Allah Iskandari, he talks about, rahimallah, he talks about, this persistent need of the human being to always be in self-calculation mode. And self-calculation is basically what he calls tadbir. You're always in this state of trying to maintain, plan, self-planning for yourself. And basically his big part of his work is silencing that for the sake of being illuminated. That illumination comes when you desist or you stop this tendency to always self-calculate for yourself, where you put this burden on your mind to always be in calculation mode, always be in planning mode, where you're always in this tadbir mode. I gotta plan, I gotta think, I gotta, And what that is that you really forgot how Allah has always taken care of you. You've forgotten, like you're in this moment where you're struggling, and then you actually are so disconnected from the fact that Allah is the one who's has always taken care of you. He's always sustained you. But when a struggle happens, when someone is going through that state of like they have a problem, what happens is they fixate on that problem, and they see how big their problem is, not how big Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, how great Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And so he says something really beautiful about how, like, if you reflect back on your life, you'll see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has always taken care of you up to this point. And so why not trust, basically, essentially, it makes you think, like, why not trust that He's going to take care of you after this point, or even in this point as well. And so when you're always, though, in that mode of like perfectionism, and people are always in this state of like self-calculation, self-planning, I gotta do, and while neglecting who Allah is in their life. And that's why this dua is so powerful in times of distress, to say, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, the one who sustains everything, right? The one who's ever living, ever all-sustaining. You just remember, last week we talked about La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and I want to follow up about the challenge we started last week to say 100. Who was here last week, by the way? Okay. And how many of you did the 100 a day challenge? Oh, awesome. Alhamdulillah, that's awesome. Okay, a little bit attempted. Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. To say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah 100 times a day. Yeah. We'll continue with 100 times a day, at least for a month. Let's try to continue it for a month. If anyone missed it, just watch the last session. We talked about its importance. But that's also a statement that just reminds you of who's in control, who's powerful, who has your back. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that sometimes when we engage in these cycles, it really does reflect our disconnect from who Allah is in our life, His power, and how much we try to take on that Allah did not ask us to take on. And how much we try to carry that Allah did not ask us to carry. So first, lower self-value is perfectionism. Believing you always have to be perfect, mistake-free, void of flaws, and without failures or setbacks in life. That's essentially what perfectionism is that I am good as long as I am all these things that I just mentioned. This leads to greater, like I mentioned before, toxic shame, hopelessness, anxiety, distress, and inauthenticity. You can't be in a state of sidq or truthfulness if your priority is to maintain this perfect image. A higher self-value that replaces that is being a work in progress, viewing yourself as a work in progress, meaning that believing that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect, and you will always be a work in progress. If you can accept that, you've already minimized or reduced that tendency or that attachment you have to perfectionism. Because if you can say, I'm always going to be a work in progress, forget this perfectionism, I'm always going to be a work in progress, I'm always going to be walking towards Allah on this journey in this world. Believing that perfectionism is an illusion and not a truth or reality, and that being sincere in front of Allah with one's intentions and efforts is what is most important. So that's a higher self-value. You're in that state, I need to maintain this perfect image. No. What is my intention? What is the effort that I put in to follow through on that intention? In that moment, you're bringing yourself down to earth. You're practicing humility, number one, because now you have to assess who you are in front of Allah, not who you are in front of the people. You have to assess the image that you actually are presenting to Allah, who has the most accurate and truthful image of who you are. And you're detaching from trying to maintain an ideal image that's not accurate. And that takes so much energy from you, energy you need to actually be a work in progress and be working on the areas you need to work on. And that's why perfectionism sometimes can really prevent people from growth, because when you're in that mode of trying to present a perfect image, you're not in the mode of actually working on yourself. You're not in the mode of facing your nafs. You're not in the mode of wow, I have this flaw. Okay, how can I take it to Allah? How can I work on it? How can I face it? Ya Allah, I need your help with this. Please help me with this. You're not actually rolling up your sleeves. That's why perfectionism is a lower self-value, because it keeps you comfortable and it doesn't push you towards working on yourself. Does that make sense? Are we clear on why perfectionism is a lower self-value now? I know in the beginning everyone's like, I saw some faces like, how is perfectionism nafs-centered? But I hope that's clear now. Okay, good. So believing that no part of this higher self-value of being a work in progress is that you're believing that no good effort, even if not perfect, is lost in front of Allah. Now remember, I gave you the example of a perfectionist, how they can throw in something they did entirely or something they were going to do entirely just because one thing was off, right? When you now function from a higher place, when you function from your higher self, these are what I call ruh-driven values, not nafs-driven values, right? Your ruh is not from here, it comes from a higher place and is designed for a higher place. So we want to develop values that are aligned with our ruh, with our soul, the soul that transcends this human experience, the soul that does not die when our physical body dies, right? So when you function now from this sacred space, you know that nothing is lost in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you stop actually throwing in everything you do just because of one mistake, which is also an attribute or an example of self-sabotage. People who are perfectionists often self-sabotage. They'll put in effort, one thing goes off. What do? They mess up everything they did. Because now they look at everything they did as not worthy, not good enough. But when you function from a higher place that is rooted in intention and rooted in consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know that nothing is lost, any ounce of good you do is lost in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So this leads, instead of a lot of toxic shame, a lot of hopelessness, a lot of anxiety, a lot of distress, a lot of inauthenticity. And by the way, when I work with people who struggle with perfectionism, they often don't really have a strong sense of self. They don't have a strong sense of who they are because they haven't been in a state of authenticity. Oftentimes they're not aware, you know what I mean? But when you get into this place where you view yourself now as a work in progress, I don't no longer need to function from this perfectionist place, you get the opposite. You get more truthfulness. You get more peace in your life. You invite more peace in your life. You invite more alignment, more consistency, more istiqamah, which is so powerful. Your ability to walk towards Allah in all your conditions, not just when you're perfect. This is what happens. A perfectionist, sometimes, I say people struggle with perfectionism in different areas. Perfectionism on the spiritual path it kind of looks like this. I have a day or like a week where, let's say you get up, you pray tahajjud, you pray fajr, you pray everything on time, you read Quran, and that's what you view as like, wow, I'm good spiritually, like this week, right? Next week, you skip tahajjud, you already view that whole day as, oh man, I didn't do what I need to do. Or someone misses a prayer. I know I've seen people throw in the rest of the day. Subhanallah. This is a sign that you're circling around your nafs. You're circling around this, you're in that cycle of perfectionism. This toxic cycle of basically you defining what perfect and good looks like and forgetting what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually deemed as good. So let's say that person who says, oh, I messed it up, I don't need to do any good deeds today. Is that really aligned with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is that something Allah would be pleased with? No. But because that toxic shame is so powerful, and why this inner work is so important is because you need to know how to regulate that. You need to know how to channel that and basically not exacerbate your own, exacerbate these difficult emotions by you judging yourself and viewing yourself now as worthless or not deserving of going to Allah when you make a mistake. Because shaitan will utilize that. He will try to basically maximize those moments. So viewing yourself as a work in progress, and rather than, constantly needing to be perfect, you also start feeling greater hopefulness as well and inner freedom. And I want to remind you of the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as for those who believe and do good deeds, we do not let the reward of anyone who does a good deed go to waste. This is such a powerful verse. When you do something good and someone doesn't react to it the right way, remember this verse. When you do a good deed and then you weren't able to do good deeds the rest of the day, let's say, remember that you did that good deed and that good deed does not go to waste. If you mess up and you get back on track, Allah sees that. Remember last week I said, or the week before, I said progress is not that you arrive at a destination. Progress is how quickly you can correct yourself. And so to add on to that, it's how quickly you can turn back to Allah. Progress is that, it's not that you're never going to sin, you're never going to make a mistake. No, but progress is that, wow, it used to take me a month to make tawbah and to get back on track after you missed a prayer, let's say. No, now it's a week. Then it's a day. Then it's not even. I missed, I make it up, I go to the next prayer. Right? That's progress. It's how quickly can I correct myself? How quickly can I make a dua when I'm in distress? Before, it used to take me this amount of time before I would even think to make a dua. Now you make a dua right away. And you channel everything you experience in the direction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's how you live that's it. It's not that you never experience pain. It's not that, sometimes people evaluate it like this, like, oh wow, I've been, and it's funny because I always think that when you make statements like this, Allah tests you sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes like when you think progress is like you're always feeling zen, then guess what, right? Oh wow, I've been feeling pretty zen. I think I'm healed, And then you get tested and then what do you think? It's like opposite extreme. I'm not healed, right? See, like people say these things, right? Like they think that like if they feel pain, they're not good. If they feel zen and peace, then they're great. Rather than viewing it all as part of your human experience, and my job as Allah's servant is to make sure that I am responding in a way that is pleasing to Him, that I'm conscious of Him, and that I'm taking everything to Him. And in that, you're really doing what serves you, by the way. You're not doing something that harms you. You're doing something that serves you, because essentially what you're doing is, okay, we got this, like you're going to carry it with me. You're going to actually carry it with me, for me. You're going to take care of it with me. I'm not alone. And essentially, the more you delay going back to Allah, the more you are trying to carry things by yourself when Allah never intended for you to carry it by yourself. And I think that's another truth that you just need to kind of create as a rule for yourself. I'm not meant to carry things alone. Why do I keep trying to punish myself and try to do things alone? Why? I have Allah, He's right here. Why am I isolating myself from Allah? Why am I keeping myself? I know, where else am I going to go? And it's an ayah in the Quran. Allah says, where are you going? Where are you running to, essentially? So make it a rule for yourself. Eventually, I'm gonna go back to Allah. Now, do I want to go back to Allah after a month? After I've spent a lot of this time feeding my nafs, and it's going to be so much harder? Or try to go back to Allah as soon as I can? Yes, you can continue missing your prayers, but eventually you're going to come back. Now, do you want to make it worse? Or do you want to just get back on track today, rather than get back on track a month later and it feels so much heavier? Let's say you got into the routine of Quran. You missed a day, you missed a week. Okay, just start. Just do it Nike, like I always say. Just rip the Band-Aid and just do it. Just sit down, force yourself, open the book and read. Open the Quran and read. The first few verses you're going to read is going to feel heavy. Afterwards, it's going to feel lighter. But shaitan wants you starting. By the way, think about anything you do to serve yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, right? For those of you into fitness, I know, or working out, that the hardest thing is starting a workout routine. It's not even the actual workout routine, it's you starting, right? But once you start, you're like, wow, I did day 1. I can do day 2. I did day 2. You can do day 3, right? And then eventually you actually become attached to doing that workout. The hardest part for anyone really to do anything good for themselves is at the beginning before you start. You know, I learned a lot about our path with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through hiking and going through different, like walking different paths and in nature. And you learn, subhanAllah, you learn so much because whenever you're standing at the beginning of a hiking path, especially if you're going to go uphill, it always looks so like difficult. Sometimes, by the way, you don't see the whole path, right? Because it's like in the forest or whatever. And that also is a test. Wow, so I'm going to walk something. I don't see, you know, because as the nafs, what does the nafs want? It wants to see the whole path. Show what's going to happen. Can you tell me? Is it going to be okay? Like, you know, and you have to actually tame your nafs in those moments to start walking. But as you start walking, Allah shows you the path. The path reveals itself, right? And sometimes before you even begin, you see this uphill and you're like, me up there? Like, how, someone calculate that for me. Like, how am I down here and I'm going to get up there? And you know what's really interesting is that the farther you are from a hill, the higher the hill looks, right? The closer you get to the hill, what's the opposite of I can't think of the word. Just, it's not as high. It's not as high, right? So it doesn't look as intimidating. It really doesn't. SubhanAllah, I think there's so much to learn from that because you realize that when you are at the beginning of anything, things always look intimidating. Things always look scary. It always feels so heavy. And shaitan, I think that the thing he tries to get us to not do is that first step, because he knows that first step is the hardest. And if you can be in those moments, go beyond your feelings and your fear, because courage is not the absence of fear, by the way. Courage is that you feel fear and you face it and you do it anyway. That's what courage is. It's not that you don't feel fear. It's not that you're worried. It's not that, no, it's that you feel these things, but you know that you have to start and you have to go and you have to walk because it serves you. And so, as you do anything, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always is there and He shows you the path, but don't delay starting anything in life that is good for you. Don't delay starting. So this applies to you, your worship, your spiritual routine, anything that you haven't been doing, that you left. It might feel heavy, especially when you got yourself into a routine. This is always hard too. When you get yourself into a routine and you know what it feels like, and then you get off for a while, it's always harder to go back because you almost feel so bad that, why did I get off in the first place? I had such a great routine going for myself. But it's the same thing. And put that as a rule for yourself too. Even when you start a spiritual routine, let's say today you start reading Quran, right? Prepare yourself already. Even if I fall off, it's okay. If I fall off for a week, if I fall off for a day, I'm just going to get back on. Like, prepare yourself already for those times where you are human and things don't go as perfect, because things happen. So don't set yourself up for failure. Don't set yourself up for self-sabotage.